Increasing all his lanky.
Right? Hey, sit down first. When you go, just 10 minutes. Relax, man. Oh, not that.
By the way, you guys are live.
Really? Oh yeah. I need 4 paper.
Okay,
I need like 2 or 3. Yeah, I'll give back as feedback. Can I have one more? Alrighty. So I call this house to order on the motion that this house will censor doctors, medical protectionists who lead an healthy lifestyle. This house will censure. Man, this one didn't write well. So. All right, here.
Mrs. Speaker, I'll be completely honest with you on one thing. I am most likely going to receive better advice about working out when it comes from Moses than it would be from Terence, for example. I'm sorry, mate, but it's just the truth. But here's the problem, and here's the burden that we really have to take from the side of government. I'll tell you one thing. Doctors have a duty to live up the kind of lifestyle that they advocate and tell their own patients to then live about. Our stance from the side of government is simple. We will publicly name and shame on you, doctors, who contradict their own advice if they were to not follow the same lifestyle advices that they then give their patients at the end of the day. What is the problem that we see within today's space? We see the problem, it happens when doctors do not follow the same advice that they then give towards their patients. Firstly, whatever your doctor tells you, whatever they then tell you, will become the kind of credence that has to be held by that own person in itself. So, for example, patients are going to less likely believe doctors who then live unhealthy lifestyles when you contradict the kind of advice that you then give your own patients. But secondly, we think that doctors no longer then become trusted professionals. If a student from IMU smokes and drinks, Mr. Speaker, we probably think they shouldn't graduate that well because it doesn't really follow the professional standard that should be kept by doctors themselves. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, do we think that this impacts the lifestyle of the average Joe negatively? Why? Because although you can see it as an objective benefit that as my doctor tells me to live a good lifestyle, but at the same time, he doesn't live the kind of lifestyle that he wants to, it demoralizes a certain patient into thinking that the same kind of person who tells you to do something is the exact person who then doesn't do it, and it shows towards you how it demoralizes that person's ability. This means that this unhealthy lifestyle will seem like a secret thing that the doctors somehow think is a guilty pleasure for them to do, but then they tell you that you should then live a lifestyle that they then advocate towards you in the end of the day. How will it look like under the side of government? Firstly, we think that when a patient visits a doctor, there will be a certificate that is viewable that has a history of a contradicting lifestyle in itself. The very fact that if you smoke or if you drink, then you will have a certificate that tells that this doctor lives that kind of lifestyle. So for another example, is that probably if a doctor is a cardiac specialist, right? But at the same time, a certificate tells you that a doctor has a long lifetime, has made certain active choices to take in a lot of cholesterol, or probably he eats too much nasi lemak in the morning, thank you IMU. That means that active choice of a lifestyle is something that the doctor is very much willing to take, and it's something that is already objectively seen as bad. Yes, it's bad, but cholesterol intake, everyone here should start jogging pretty soon. But secondly, Mr. Speaker, if we think that it is very much possible for you to look up online and even probably go on Google, look for this person's history, we think that a registrar can also be set up online for other people to be used as a reference to see whether or not they should believe their doctors. So before I move on, yeah.
At what point is Hippocratic oath does doctor need to live up with your expectation as society? Is doctor now a public commodity to live up as your role model?
Yeah, sure. Because if my doctor tells me things which he doesn't really practice, then it probably would demoralize me. Sit down. I would then give you advice for jogging later on. My first argument is this: why does this lifestyle have to be exactly the ones that it advocate? Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the argument will be about how doctors are the face of the health industry, and you should be the face of the conventional health industry at the end of the day. The first argument: what is the nature of a trusted professional, and why do we want to trust doctors who graduate from IMU? If you are a professional, Mr. Speaker, Madam Chair, you need to give credence towards other people in believing what you want to say necessarily. The very fact that I'm more less likely going to believe that person about me telling me to lose weight means one thing, that it becomes or gives it less credence towards what you want to believe from that person. It's not just within the things that you can also prescribe, but the kind of lifestyle that you also lead in itself. Also, Mr. Speaker, we think that the advice that you propagate has to be about things such as changing your habits. And what is the nature of changing habits? It is not really easy, and it is health conditioning to tell another person to probably stop drinking or stop smoking in itself. And it becomes psychologically harder for someone to feel. And it's easy for them to then feel demoralized when the exact person who tells you to change a very hard habit doesn't change themselves in the end of the day. Sit down. The thing is this, that I am more likely going to emulate the kind of quality that other people tell me. The same way I emulate this kind of power structure that my teacher within high school was to me. So if my teacher then chose good personality, my parents do not smoke or drink, and they tell me to also not smoke or drink, Mr. Speaker, it is very much likely for you to not work and emulate the kind of authority that they then put towards you. That's how teachers work. That's how people relate towards power structures when it comes to respect lecturers at the end of the day. But B, when these people get named and shamed, what then happens, Madam Chair? We think that it will then create an incentive for certain doctors to give more credence towards their own advice at the end of the day. So, for example, if I'm a private practitioner and I want people to come to my clinic in itself, that means that I will then work out, or I will then make sure that I do not lead the kind of lame, bad lifestyle that is necessarily bad for me itself. But for another example, if I'm a researcher and I want people to read my own journal, whether I want to publish certain medical data, that means that I will then pick up a better habit in itself. The benefit of that is that A, you become easy for people to relate to. So what happens when people easily relate towards you means that they will most likely change their own bad habits at the end of the day, leading to even more healthy people within society. But the second thing is this, that also that doctor becomes the kind of person who practices the kind of knowledge that you also try to preach towards people. You practice what you preach, Madam Chair. That's why it is very much important to motivate other people at the end of the day. My second number, very quickly, why do you think the face of the conventional health industry is very much important right now? I'll tell you another bad example of what alternative medicines really are. For example, Coke Zero as compared to Aqua Coke is seen as, other people seem to propagate Coke Zero as a good thing because it has a certain sugar that is different from conventional sugar. It's called aspartame, by the way. The problem of aspartame is that it becomes easy for aspartame or alternative medicine to hijack the narrative of saying conventional medicine is bad because your own doctor is fat and he probably drinks Coke at the end of the day. It becomes easier for other people to tell you to take aspartame if you were to propagate these kinds of things within status quo itself. What is the problem of that? Alternative medicine is not really that good as compared to conventional medicine itself. We understand that even Coke Zero has its own side effects, such as making people not understand, or it is a latent sugar that makes you fat and obese later on when you do not necessarily realize it at the end of the day. We do not want a community that isolates itself from the conventional medicine as they then take alternative medicine at the end of the day. Doctors should understand that you practice what you preach. We think it's very important that I follow the exact person who seeks to tell me what authority they have. We are very proud, of course.
I thank the Prime Minister for that opening speech. Now call upon the Leader of Opposition to give us their speech in terms of.
Just because you don't trust your doctor doesn't mean the doctor is a bad person. I mean, bad that they can't perform the things that they are supposed to be good at. So this is why we believe that in opposition believe that there's a separation between privacy as a working adult. Because everyone has the right of information of identity and also an individual right to the identity. So because the individual's power over their body autonomy is important, because we acknowledge that you have concern in regards to the doctor's lifestyle and the hypocrite oath, but we still believe that doctors are still rational individuals and can still make decisions for them and what's best for the patient. So it's also worth noting that no link whatsoever about the life choices of the doctors that affects the decision making as a doctor themselves. So, in opposition, as a stance, we believe in binary and duality of the situation is more important. Because personal conduct in private sphere should be private. Whatever they do in it should be private. And the conduct in public settings are the ones that should be meddled with and be questioned. So, my rebuttal to that issue will be integrated with. So, firstly, it is important to note that the punishment or censure inside government is extremely arbitrary and hard to objectify the harms and the benefits from it. We do not think that any measurement can be proportional when it comes to deciding what values are good and what values are bad in personal choices. So, why to censor doctors to live an unhealthy lifestyle? We believe that the choices the doctor makes is legitimate because they cause no third-party harm. The extent of this harm and how does the harm affect the party is important in creating policies from the perspective of a state. We have never made a policy that limits your choice or the ones that define your happiness, because we acknowledge that is a very subjective and a diverse manner. That is why we allow boxing. That is why we allow people smoking. That we did ban it, because it acknowledges that these choices are legitimate and enables to pursue their own happiness. So the second level, going to second level, is that government policy of censoring doctor is sending a strong message to the public. That it is more important than you to denounce the doctors are bad doctors because they are hypocritical and not practicing the hypocrite oath. So why is this harmful? Two ways. First, you as a state make something very personal. You make a prerequisite in saying that a good doctor must practice a certain conduct. We agree that the role of conduct must happen and be drawn. It should be drawn in professional setting, for example, such as hospital and the place of their work. So whatever they do in the dark and whatever they do as a doctor, the pathway they do, the thing that they do as a doctor should be questioned more than their own personal choices. So the action of state denouncing that their personal life is a form of states overstepping boundaries and intruding their personal life. This is harmful because now they make a policy that involves individuals' personal life and the public sphere, that people know that you're a bad doctor. It is important to note that it is very different from other policies such as abortion or gender reassignment. At the very least, that these two policies prioritize consent, and most important factor, but in government's policy, the doctor will never know the length of the sacrifice that they once sit down. So, secondly, it is
This debate isn't about a matter of privacy. Doctors even take medical examinations and concede to this info in the first place. If human being works where you emulate the behavior of your power structure, why is it okay to negatively affect the behavior and psychology of the patient?
Okay, the thing is, whatever doctors do in private is still what they do in the private. But as long as they do not intervene, as long as they do not disrupt their capability in working as a doctor, so it shouldn't be any problem with that. So on the second issue on why it is harmful, why is it harmful to censor doctor? Okay. So it's overburdening the doctor. So let's nuance this debate. In a situation where the doctors have to perform surgery and they are stressed, the only outlet for them is to smoke a cigarette. So these are the kinds of things that provide temporary sanity for them to perform the surgery. So in government's model, you remove this outlet and risk them of being distracted from performing the surgery. This will lead to a higher probability of accidents happening and people might die. So we, from the role of opposition, preserve this kind of choices. So one more. So the thing is, what opposition has been trying to tell you is that we believe that humans are not perfect. Just because you do something bad doesn't mean that you would affect other choices of what you do when you are working as a professional. So team opposition has always think that even though as long as what you do doesn't override what you do as a professional, and the same thing goes to the same thing. Private life stays private. Whatever you do as a person working, you do as a thing. So opposition, we as opposition have already told you that how privacy, the separation of privacy is always important for us because we acknowledge that there are two different things when you're a professional working also as a private private. So even though at the very least we provide them another avenue to distress themselves if this is what they feel is able to make them distressed. While side government thinks that they think just because you're fat doesn't mean you can't be given advice. For all you know, that fat person most probably would have been a heavy lifter at the same time, but now he has gone fat, but still his advice is still good and still effective at that time. So with that, we believe that humans are not perfect, and is that.
Thank you very much, Leader of Opposition. Now call upon the Deputy Leader of Government to extend their arguments. So,
Guys, mind the wire.
Moses, I think there's a form of confusion here when it comes to medication and changing lifestyles inside of opposition. Because for you to change lifestyle, it's not easy. It's something that is psychological. So you have to play the person that's giving you advice who becomes the visual indicator in front of you. Now, for example, if a person has a huge consumption of cholesterol and they are less likely, and somehow along the lines that the patient does not actually find out about it, the doctor might end up in cardiac arrest. So what is perceived here is that it's impossible for me to actually follow the advice of this doctor, and I'm also demotivated at the same time because the trusted professional that gave me the advice in the first place has already failed. So what happens here is that you may somehow give good advice, even though you are a fat person, but it's because you affect that person psychologically. The patient then is less likely to follow the advice. So there comes the harm that you're looking for. If you're harming the lives of another person, so now the second part of the rebuttal that you touch on is about privacy. When you become a trusted professional, that's where your privacy ends because it concerns the life of another person. So even though in your private life you may say that you may not want to actually take alcohol, but somehow along the lines it is kept secret and people. So in that sense, your privacy ends because it harms another person's motivation to by having this content regardless of I would die, and that motivation makes a crucial factor when it comes to medicating. Second part, the third part we wanted to argue is how this creates a form of distraction for surgeons who might just want to have a cigarette because it will distract him from actually doing his best job. We think this is a weird angle because we always put some form of degree or some form of regulations on how a certain professional should also act. That is why people who have criminal records, it's less likely for them to actually be entered in the bar unless they go to greater rehabilitation, which is longer than the prison period. Then they are more likely to do so because they may get these people. It's fair for us to actually put this form of positions because of the after effects later on. Just because one person gets distracted when he doesn't have a cigarette, it's better that more people boycott this doctor instead and goes to a person who is not distracted by the idea that he needs to have a cigarette by that. So the conclusion here is simple, is that it's okay to add more regulation as long as the quality of the product allows better medication and better focus for the patient. But this last thing that they didn't tackle for Mukris on what happens if the doctor fails to become the face of the product. What happens here is that other things like alternative methods, let's say for example, rather than cut, take instead, because the person who is selling the product is perceived as somebody who is healthy in comparison to a doctor who has diabetes. So you are more likely to take an easy way out because that's how human behavior acts. You are more likely to follow what is convenient for you rather than changing your lifestyle and become a better person, but you take things that are much more, that is alternative, but it doesn't go through peer review, and it's unsafe, and you don't know what the end results are, especially when aspartame can also in the long run cause obesity. What I'm going to talk about this day, I'm going to talk about two things. First, I'm going to talk about how trigger warnings allow patients to divorce the doctor from the advice. Yes.
People make choices anyway, regardless in whatever situation. But under your model, you're impinging the rights of privacy of an individual at the expense of other people. At the very least, on the outside, people can still opt into a thinner doctor, not just abandoning them.
Look, your privacy stops because you harm the psychological effect of the other person, because you are not sure, sit down, I've taken yours, you are not sure whether this advice in the long run could hold you elevated to the next step. Even if the advice is right, you need the person with the brilliance actually hard to follow because they don't have the motivation to do so. First argument, trigger warnings. Trigger warnings allows patients to divorce the doctor from the advice. So when a doctor makes a statement, and you know this doctor has a history of diabetes instead, and you listen to advice, now the patient actively knows that this doctor in front of you has gone through diabetes, but you can divorce all the advice that he's made, and you are able to make judgment according to what it is. Why this is really important? Because you are not demotivated by the actions of the person in front of you, but you know his advice is credible when it corresponds to another person who does not has diabetes instead. So you are able to make the rational calculus by seeing that just because the person in front of me somehow lives negative lifestyle, I am no longer demotivated as how it is at the same time are perceived as somebody who is able to change within the process. Now, the second part to this argument is that when you create trigger warnings, that means you can also see the transformation of other people within the process on how they change their lives. The second argument is that behavioral change cannot be perceived as something impossible. When somebody wants to change their behavior, there is always an end goal towards it. So if the person visually in front of you does not actually portray the end goal, it's harder for you to opt in within the situation. What happens here is that you are less likely to achieve what is originally advised towards you. But when you come to name and shame, that means the doctor would actually have to change his behavior in order to keep his patients or to keep his business. What this also allows is that it becomes the guide for the patients by saying that the doctor has transformed from fat man to a thin man. So there is a visual perception, whatever goals they want to create is actually achievable because medication cannot stand on its own. You may have all the diet tablets within your pantry, but it does not mean you have the will to achieve following. So if you have this huge transformation with doctors who are actually fat, or people like me who's fat, but decides to become thin instead, that means you're more likely to ask me what is going on, and you perceive it is actually possible because that transformation happened in front of me. What they create here is that you create doctors who are incompetent and who are not going to follow the advice and not create this transformation in front of the faces of people. Sometimes when you will have the advice, you need a face in front of it so that you can see what is the end goal, what can I work towards to. They don't create that.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the deputy leader of position to be able to pay attention and support the team. And so, yeah.
for this, ladies and gentlemen, is that the authority and the validity of that particular advice comes from things such as your training, things such as a certification of that training, ladies and gentlemen. No, thank you. As well as the many different contributive rap sheet that you've had in regards to your performance as a doctor. This means, ladies and gentlemen, that individuals know the knowledge and also the depth of the content of the course that they have taken, as well as the advice that comes after. No, thank you. Apart from that, individuals are well aware that doctors have a rational duty to ensure that the advice they give is for the very best for that particular patient, as well as to correspond immediately with the harmful symptom that that individual actually has. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, doctors also are accountable to the consultation that they actually provide, especially considering that we're talking about an authority that comes from a dialogue that exists in a private, privileged communication between an individual and a doctor. What this means, ladies and gentlemen, is that an individual will solely rely on any health advice whatsoever, solely on that dialogue and that privileged communication that exists between him and his doctor. So we don't see any nexus in how that individual lives his life and all of the practices and lifestyle that he has, the validity of the advice that he provided to his patients. So that's one thing that we need to clear up. So thank you. Most of my rebuttals will be integrated in my argumentation. But before that, another thing that I need to provide, that I need to respond to from that side. They want to argue that now we provide the ability for people to divorce all the advice that they actually had with that was provided by their doctors. This is a huge problem because number one, it's all completely subjective to how an individual interprets the validity and also the comprehension of that doctor. At the very outside exam, we provide individuals with the choice. At the very least, if they want to take an advice from a person who is not fat or who is not of a certain lifestyle, they can take from that individual. But that doesn't necessarily mean we have the very right to compromise that individual's economic income from the very practice and from the very training that he has received for many different years that he has spent in medical school. So thank you. But more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, even then, we don't necessarily think that's even valid to begin with, because it's all to the interpretation of individuals. Therefore, we don't see how individuals perceive the validity of the advice that's provided by these doctors and also the lifestyle that they actually practice. A lot of my other rebuttals will be integrated in my argumentation. No, thank you. How is this targeting and personalized? Using an individual's identity as a medical practitioner and also the contribution he has made by things such as censoring him in public and also making it a point for individuals who have public knowledge of the practices of this medical practitioner. This means, ladies and gentlemen, that practitioner is placed in a bad light and encourages antagonism to him as a medical practitioner. Now, doctors to disclose any information or any details of patients who have treated their blood, such as their race, their identity, because we don't want individuals to place an initial judgment on that individual based on things that save their lives, and this applies to this as well. So what are the harms of this antagonistic life? Number one, he loses his legitimacy as a medical practitioner and stop our credibility as well. This means, ladies and gentlemen, that policy denies the economic outcome and income of his studies and also his training for something that only exists in his private sphere. This means all the practice, all his practice, and all the conduct that comes afterwards all come from the medical degree and also come from the practice that from the training that he has received from medical school. This means that lifestyles are not absolute whatsoever, completely subjective and up to the way an individual has lived this life and also has nurtured as an individual. It does not intervene and does not intervene how he practices himself to a patient and practices himself to an individual. This means that it's completely unfair how you compromise the economic income of these individuals and make them lose their jobs just because of an abstract, arbitrary moral standard that exists under that side of the house, ladies and gentlemen. In a comparative, even though smoking or most unhealthy lifestyles were targeted in workplaces, they never profile an individual based on things that exist in their private sphere, and it's completely independent of their job scope. As long as you're rational, as long as you're able to provide sound advice, as long as you comprehend immediately all the things that you have learned in your medical degree, then that means it's within your job scope and completely independent of all the practices that you have as a smoker, as people who live an unhealthy lifestyle, and so on. Before I proceed, yes, sir.
If privacy concerns so much, then why is it okay for people to demand the assets of a person running for office just to know what they has?
Sir, the thing is that there is a nexus between how he practices himself, the money that he has in his private life, as compared to the money that he would have to conduct himself on within the public sphere and within his political life. He's completely independent with his capabilities as a doctor, for example, to give advice and also to comprehend all of the knowledge that he has within his medical degree. The second half is that you would read a predisposition of performance on these doctors. This means, ladies and gentlemen, people will immediately judgment on which doctors that they will opt for and which medical practitioners they would actually opt for. The thing is, this is extremely harmful because the state must assume that the need and the necessity of medical advice is always a time-sensitive issue. We cannot allow any leeway, or we cannot allow any option for individual to choose which medical practitioner they actually want. We have to make sure that at the very least, we don't contribute and we don't allow any single instance where an individual will want to attach a bad value or will want to be antagonistic to their doctors, because we cannot let people be picky, we cannot let people to simply choose which doctors they will actually rather choose. It's for the sake of their lives, and this is something very tangible, not only to these patients, but also to all the doctors who have been practicing for a very long time and had to cope with a lifestyle that actually gives them temporary sanity. That's some arbitrary moral standard. We will not stand for that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Position will speak from the government side, summarize the questions for the government side. There's one, I think it's there, right? Okay.
Madam Speaker, when you think of a profession that affects the lives of the society, you have a higher burden to prove in the society that you have to show good examples to these people in the first place. Just like how being fat due to everything is not seen as being fat due to unhealthy lifestyles, that's just how different it would be for patients to consult the best doctors that they think they should consult, right? Because we acknowledge that humans have always lived by examples according to criteria or a census review in order to maintain their sustainability of life. That's why we see that it's not about the worth of your advice, but also like the way you lead by your examples, and also the way you present yourself in terms of your appearance and how you try to convince people in the word of the advice and knowledge that you have in the words that you are giving out to these people in the first place, right? And it's not a bad thing to actually ask these doctors to practice their lifestyle, right? Because they also get to live and lead a more quality life because of this as well. So we don't think there's anything harmful in the first place. I have two issues that we'll tackle in this debate. Firstly, in terms of to what extent should this privacy and choices go, and secondly, on whether judgment of these doctors are a bad thing. But first thing first, to what extent should these privacy and choices go, right? Because they talk to you about how the doctors have the right to the privacy, should be allowed to make choices. But what it seems that they're doing is that they're advocating for these doctors to make bad choices for themselves, right? So we see that this is not good. They also didn't answer or didn't really actually respond to the kind of question or to the kind of standard that we have established in this debate. Like for example, lawyers, if they do have like criminal background, or for engineers, if they have caused like some misconstruction in the past, like people tend to trust them less. And if lawyers, it's not going to be admitted for a practice law suspended if you have criminal background. And because of this, we see that why not extend this kind of standard of care towards these doctors as well? Because you need people to trust you. You need people to be convinced by your persuasion, the way you appear yourself, and how you take care of your own body. It's not just what you also need to show in terms of practicality how they should lead their life, so that you can see the real life results of what happens if you have to take care of your body, right? So this is known as professional state of care, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? Just like how you won't actually trust your personal trainer if he or she is actually a fat person, simply because like there's no credence. So it means that this person not really following their own advice. Because of them not following their own advice, So if you give out this advice, it loses their worth. Why does it? How does it lose their worth? Because now it may not be efficient or effective for these people to follow the diet that has been programmed by this personal trainer in the first place. Because if you look at him, he doesn't look healthy at all. So how do you expect people to trust you when you don't take heed of your own advice, right? So in terms of validity of advice, we think that it's proper for these people to use their experience in terms of giving advice, but they don't actually follow the things that they have tried to promote to these people in the first place, right? So second issue on judgment of these doctors, whether or not it is a bad thing, right? So they talk about the doctors will now lose their legitimacy because now we have named and shamed this doctor, and this is not going to be good for them because now it will impact the economic income of this person and how they don't get to use the money for the greater benefits, for example. But firstly, we see that it's okay with these doctors to lose their legitimacy in the first place because then it will actually stress this doctor to make better choices for their lives, which we think will also influence the motivation of these patients in order to follow whatever advice that they have. So we see that there's nothing wrong with that. In terms of economic income, why not? Because it's making better choices for their lives. And it also now jeopardizes your profession, right? So now you will think better in terms of how you should lead us. Because as my opening line has already stated, right? Because you pick this profession, so it means that you have agreed to the risk and outcomes and consequences that you have to control because of the choice that you make. So because you have picked this, you have to stick to the consequences. You may be free to choose, but not the consequences, right? So that's why we say that there's nothing wrong with that. But before that, yes.
If I suffer from excruciating pain disease and know that I will be better if I listen to a doctor, regardless of his lifestyle, would it be extremely important for me to rationally listen to what he says?
Okay, thank you, sir. The first thing of all, we are not instructing these patients to see these doctors in the first place. They can see these doctors, but just in terms of the impression, this doctors will lose its credit in terms of diet, supplement, meat, whatever thing that you do to advise these people. So we see that these patients, if they are excruciating pain and they still need to visit this doctor or go for surgery, go for it. And we're not stopping you guys to go for it, but we just want to make sure that these doctors have some sort of awareness because of the kind of shame or embarrassment that you have to go through that. It's dangerous for these people in the first place if the doctors really try to live the best way possible. And something that talk about time being time sensitive, right? Okay, so the POI was actually referring to that. If it's sensitive, then the doctors should know that what to happen, right? It's not gonna interrupt or intervene with the kind of decision that they will make for the patients. That is really important, and doctors will get to say whatever is good for their patient if the patients need surgery and whatever kind of treatment is on due to, right? So we have no whatsoever problem with that kind of statement in the first place. Right? But what's the problem and what kind of burden that we can really tackle from our kids, right? It's people the idea of alternative medicine, right? How we say that the growth of aspartame might be growing, and because of that, like what you're doing, if you don't do this, just gonna make the quality of life of these people are gonna be even worse and much worse, right? Because of this, you're actually promoting these people to try to be bad behind the door and be a person who has two-faced, right? You're not being very honest or very truthful in terms of how you conduct your lives, how you conduct your future, right? Because we don't think it's a good thing for you to be such hypocrites in terms of how you want to carry yourself, because you need to be truthful so that the meaning behind it will have more, and because of the level of relationship between your patients will also be better, because now you understand them better, and patients will also get to relate with you much better. With that, I will be hired to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you very much. By the way, I'm missing some. It's okay. Now I'll call upon the web speaker from the opposition side to summarize the debate. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Speaker, apparently the policy coming from side government is the one that is okay to impinge on individuals' right at the expense of satisfying the public's moral standard. We told you, the state never made such policy. The moral standards are arbitrary and intangible. But in opposition, ladies and gentlemen, we tell them all that people will lose their job, people will be demoralized in doing their job, ladies and gentlemen, knowing that you set this kind of standards to every single doctors available within status, ladies and gentlemen. This is the tangible thing we're going to lose out inside of government. Government needs to start to defend. People started losing their jobs, started to feel demoralized whenever they're doing their job. You know, people like Terrence has a dream to be a doctor, and being trapped in a family should never prevent him to be a good doctor. I think that the 4 extra cheese pizzas that he takes every single night, ladies and gentlemen, is legitimate because he is a rational being person, and he is able to understand the duality of this particular situation, ladies and gentlemen, knowing that whatever things that he did in the past or in private, ladies and gentlemen, will not be translated into real professional life, ladies and gentlemen. We tell you that we are also okay with this or with or conduct we want, but it should be done at professional settings only, ladies and gentlemen. It shouldn't be drawn in the private sphere. Get that? 2 things I'm going to talk to you about in my speech. Firstly, I'm okay with meddling with personal choices of doctors. Secondly, standards. Firstly, are we okay with meddling with personal choices of doctors? They told us that doctors need to live up to the expectation of the people. People will now emulate their actions. Number 1, this is where my POI is very important. At what point, ladies and gentlemen, does doctors sign up for this kind of stage? Because under their model, individuals like doctors do not know these are the kinds of sacrifices they have to make whenever they about to become a doctor, ladies and gentlemen. This an expectation is not just about something which is unrealistic, but it's also, ladies and gentlemen, will demoralize doctors. Individuals who are aspired to become doctors, ladies and gentlemen, like for example, if they are with a fat body, ladies and gentlemen, they will not get the ability to mobilize themselves and achieve those dreams, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, it's a shame that side government tells us that in order for us to satisfy the public, ladies and gentlemen, sit down. They're okay with individuals. They're okay with individuals impeding other individuals, right? For the sake of the good perception and the good image of what doctors should be. At the place outside the house, ladies and gentlemen, if individuals wanted to get information or wanted to get certain advice on medical condition, they will go if let's say, for example, if they have a problem symptom, then if they are on their dietary regimen, they will still have the option to go to a doctor. But under your side of the house, they are creating a policy that will demoralize and ladies and gentlemen, shun this very fat doctors, ladies and gentlemen. And this is where the argument about privacy is very important, because it's not just about bodily autonomy, but it's also about impinging individuals' ability of opportunity to self-actualize themselves. They also talked about that individuals will be demoralized and they need credence, and because they will relate to the power structure. Firstly, if your concern is that individuals will only listen to individuals that they can relate to, we don't think that is true, because this is why the POI community is very important. If you are in a state that is very crucial and you're about to die, you will listen to this doctor, regardless of what they are in. This is because the situation that is to get better and not get a role, ladies and gentlemen. We think that the incentive of these individuals to follow these doctors will already be there within status. Then they told us about the parallel that people right now are demanding about politicians and lawyers who have bad records. Number 1, we need to analyze the severity of harms that have been done as politicians and also the strong statement. You made a contradiction there. Because misconduct has been made by the lawyers and also these politicians, ladies and gentlemen, is indeed something which is evil crime, right? But doctors, they only take results. They don't really do crime. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, this kind of standard we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen, is very unrealistic on the side of opposition. And also, let's talk about the idea of treatment where it creates a visual perception. Number one, why is it important for an initial predisposition in terms of you engaging with what kind of doctors that you want? Because we don't think there's a nexus between you having an initial predisposition of the doctors into the ability in solving your medical problems, ladies and gentlemen. Before we move on to my second issue, obviously.
This debate is not about medication. This debate is not about going to the ICU, but this debate is about changing the behavior of a person. This method allows you to actually have the motivation, have an visual indicator that there is an end goal you can work towards to.
Well, obviously this debate isn't about creating a change within an individual's choices, but this is about whether or not are we okay with denouncing these individuals, saying that they are bad doctors at the expense of satisfying the moral and abstract standards of society, ladies and gentlemen. And we don't think that government ever engaged on the debate. We do in our opposition, and this argument never really went with us, where whether your policy, you personalize the problems of this, you personalize the kind of choices made by these individuals, ladies and gentlemen. There's a reason why we don't disclose information that is discussed in terms of blood transfusion or organ donation, ladies and gentlemen, because we acknowledge that the time is extremely sensitive, and we move on to people who have this position that they only want a certain type of race or certain type of religion for them in order for them to be taught. These are the considerations because these are the considerations that people often consider when they talk about engaging in a medical we don't limit choices to these individuals, but is to provide an assurance that they can opt to this kind of interim benefit because there's enough resources for them. We also told you about the idea of it brings predispositions in gentlemen on how time is extremely sensitive. Outside the house, ladies and gentlemen, we also create a temporary sanctity to these people, saying that they can really smoke, they can really if they want to, ladies and gentlemen, if they could distress them and will make them comfortable doing this kind of surgery. Ladies and gentlemen, the member of the house, understand the government, ladies and gentlemen, sure, their policy will prevent individuals from smoking and from drinking. At the base and the outside the house, ladies and gentlemen, we're seeing these choices are legitimate and you can seek help wherever you want to and discriminate by the body's image.
Thank you very much. Speakers.
The medical profession is an ongoing. He still holds gap. He can agree, he still knows how to make sure you can. It's disgusting. I was sitting on that basis right now that came from that side of the house. I would like to applaud them because, ladies and gentlemen, just to answer one question in today's debate that ultimately decides why we want to debate. Personal actions and also their impact. Let's look at the first one. Patients are more likely to listen to their doctors, but at the same time, just because of the lifestyle that they practice, they would have motivation to make sure that they do things that will be healthy for them, that they will do things that will be extremely beneficial. To this, ladies and gentlemen, we've proven to you a more persuasive narrative in this issue. The persuasive one that patients are more likely to listen to their doctors because patients want rationalize the legitimacy, rationalize the validity of their advices, as well as rationalize and become responsible for complying to those advices and complying to those doctors as well, ladies and gentlemen. As said repeatedly by this whole entire bench, there has been no nexus provided with telling people that your doctor lives an unhealthy lifestyle and also making sure that people become healthy. Because when people and kids wants to become healthy, the first thing that they do is to seek the advice of the doctor who knows and is well versed, very well, in what are the means and how exactly you want to become healthy. Therefore, it's more realistic for us to assume that a patient and also an individual would, regardless of the lifestyle that's practiced by these doctors, be more likely to listen to their doctors because they know that they are the only person and they are the only authority that is available to them in advising them what is the best way for them to survive in this crazy world that we're living in. Another thing, ladies and gentlemen, that we have to talk about is how it's extremely harmful if we recognize an individual assuming duty and also calling as a doctor. Number one, the problem here is he loses his legitimacy and he loses his credibility as a doctor. No individual would hire him, no individual will consult him. And this is absolutely harmful. This is harmful. We don't agree when we start from that kind of stuff. Because one, you learn the number of doctors is simply big. We think it's extremely harmful. We have to make the assumption that at any given time, we are time for consultation by a doctor. So time for advice by a doctor. We cannot simply assume that this arbitrary moral standard would immediately mean that there will always be a supply of demand, supply for doctors, and therefore we are able to comply with that demand. More importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we still think this is absolutely harmful because, principally speaking, you attach a disposition of how individuals' performances and also careers are just because of their lifestyle. Let it be known, ladies and gentlemen, that we made it clear and this is very clear that their unhealthy lifestyle only exists within their private sphere and does not reflect in their practice as doctors whatsoever. So this, ladies and gentlemen, if your sole duty is to censure these doctors, to ensure that people are known of the status of these doctors and also the impact of these doctors, then you fail to comply to that duty. And the reason for this, ladies and gentlemen, is that the duties of these doctors are reflected by their performance, not by the things that you are accusing them in public for, ladies and gentlemen. So this means, Mr. Speaker, that we do not see what exactly is so tangible with the impact reports that came from that side of the house, whereas principally at the very least, we secure jobs and we save. Thank you.
So I'll call on the Vice Speaker from the government side to summarize the
You pick a profession that is life and death, another person, and you're supposed to be accountable. Now you access your motivator. Besides that, out for most of the arguments in this debate. Let's look what has happened here. Firstly, is that the lifestyles of the doctor does not actually affect their patient. But this debate is not about the ability to prescribe medication. The debate is not about the ability of holding a scalpel and being an ICU. But this debate is about changing the behavior of a person and how do you advocate that to a smoker? How do you advocate that to a person who's trying to get out of that? Prescribe the best medicine correctly. It may be the best medicine at. But if you get quiet of the smoking habits, and you as a trust professional, it's fully assumed that you follow your advice first. So if you were to actually somehow get rid of lung cancers, that means you demotivate other people to give up smoking. And in fact, your privacy is revoked because you affected the lives of 1,000 men who decide not to get nicotine patches and continue smoking instead. And within that process, like we said on, that means people would die within the long run. So how do you change behaviors? The only way you can change behaviors, make the life public, and people can actually view them. So if a person says that you take cholesterol, but yet he continues to actually have an intake of cholesterol, you know you wouldn't be demotivated because, that doctor isn't even following his own advice. That means I can also go to other form of professionals and listen to him as a consultant. Your job as a consultant is to change that person's motivation in order for you to change your position in life. Just because you have diet tablets within the pantry does not mean you will take it. You need to be convinced to do so. Now, the second part of this that is not conveniently in the first speaker is that whose advice do you then listen to when the person prescribing you medication looks as if he is paid? Assuming that a trusted professional is always perceived as someone who is following his own advice, that means people assume that if his medication, that person does not look healthy, that means his medication has failed in the process. What happens here is that's where they would listen to other alternatives because it's convenient. They don't have to change their behaviors. That's why I brought up the example of aspartame. So rather than a person stop taking sweetness, he decides to take artificial sweetener instead because the salesman that sells him aspartame is perceived as somebody who is healthy, as somebody who is actually working out, and is perceived as somebody that can be trusted. The problem with all of this, and never negated from the opposition, is that when it comes to other form of alternative medicines at the same time, you don't go to peer reviews, you don't go to advice where doctors say that it's actually harming your body, you don't get a consult telling you what's going on. That is why it's very dangerous, and you need doctors to be trusted according to the visual appearance at the same time. And with that, and then you can avoid people from taking aspartame and harming his life towards the end. None of that is being rebutted from the opposition. But the last part, which is so awful and it's so annoying that people don't try to engage with the debate, and the only line that they have to take is the idea of privacy, which the fact that we have already debunked affects the life of another person. That means that's where the privacy stops. But when you have the ability to act as a visual indicator that the goals that you want to achieve is possible, then you are being negligent because you are not showing that the very fact that you can actually work out in order to lose weight, and when you use cholesterol, rest. We don't want this negligence to happen. They should engage in the debate next time.
Thank you. Cross the floor, shake hands, sit outside, don't go far. We'll call you in a bit. Somewhere, go to your spouse, your partners, do the things, get your talking, just go to your house. Just saying, you're supposed to like, you're supposed just to share. Interesting. I need to go and see the doctor if he's helping.
Yeah. That's what I was quite happy with this. To not be biased.
And then it comes to personal factors. Yeah, of course. Profession. I'm not shaking my hands. It's cold.
Can both of you have the same goals?
No, just be different. You know, with one, they can be different. Point by one, but what is man, I'm busy.